I did it to protect you. The blood was still warm. Yun Haesuk noticed it first. The thin crimson thread seeping beneath the ivory silk of the bedroom door, spreading slowly across the marble floor like a whispered confession. She stood in the hallway of the Kwan estate, her cleaning cart motionless beside her. One gloved hand pressed flat against the wall to keep herself upright. Her heartbeat was the only sound she could hear. 3 years. She had worked in this house for 3 years, and in all that time she had learned exactly 2 things with absolute certainty. The first, that this family's wealth was not the kind that came from boardrooms and quarterly reports. The second, that Kwon Jisu's mother, Madame Inoue, was the most dangerous woman she had ever been paid to serve. Yun set down the folded towels she was carrying. Slowly, quietly, the way you move when you already know the worst has happened and there is no point in rushing toward it. She pushed open the bedroom door. Madame Inoue lay across the chaise longue near the window, one hand resting on her chest. Her silver hair fanned out beneath her like a crown undone. The small blade, barely 4 inches, carved handle, the kind you could mistake for a letter opener, was still embedded just below her left collarbone. Not deep enough to kill. Yun had made certain of that. Yun stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She had perhaps 6 minutes before the morning guard rotation brought someone to this floor. She had perhaps 6 minutes to decide how much of the truth she was willing to tell, and to whom and in what order. The window was pale with early light. Seoul stretched beyond it, indifferent and enormous. She crossed to the chaise, crouched beside the old woman, and checked her pulse. Steady. Faint, but steady. Inoue's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and even sedated, not dying. Yun had calculated the dosage carefully. Everything about last night had been calculated carefully. Everything except getting caught. She heard the elevator at the end of the hall before she heard his footsteps. That was the thing about Kwon Jisu. He moved like a man who had spent decades learning not to be heard, which meant that by the time you registered his presence, he was already close enough to do something about it. The bedroom door opened. He stood in the frame, tall, dressed in the dark gray of a man who had not yet been to sleep. His jaw tight and his eyes moving immediately from his mother's body to the blade to Yun's crouching figure in a single sweep that took less than 2 seconds. His expression did not break. It simply closed. "Step away from her," he said. Yun rose to her feet and turned to face him. Her gloves were stained. The morning light was honest and unkind. There was nowhere to move and nothing left to hide. So she did the only thing left available to her. She held his gaze and told him the truth. "I did it to protect you. Have you ever been in a situation where protecting someone you care about forced you to make an impossible choice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know how you would have handled it." Her name was Yun Haesuk, though almost no one in this house used it. To the kitchen staff she was simply the maid from Nairobi. A label that flattened her into something manageable and foreign, something that did not require further curiosity. To Madame Inoue she had been, for 3 years, girl. To the security team she was badge number 47, cleared for floors 2 through 4, restricted from the basement levels where the real business of the Kwan family took place. Only one person in this house had ever asked her full name and then actually used it. Kwon Jisu had asked on her 3rd day of employment, when he passed her in the east corridor carrying an armload of winter drapes and said, quietly and without breaking stride, "What is your name?" She had told him. He had nodded once and continued walking. The following morning there had been a note on her cart, handwritten 3 lines, informing her that the east corridor drapes were changed by the external cleaning service and that she should not carry loads that large unassisted. It was signed KJ and nothing else. That was the closest thing to kindness she had received in this house. She was 31 years old. She had come to Seoul on a work visa arranged through a domestic staffing agency in Johannesburg, though she had not lived in South Africa for nearly a decade. Before Seoul there had been 2 years in Singapore, 18 months in Dubai, a brief and unhappy stint in London. She moved the way people move when staying somewhere too long begins to feel like a risk. She had reasons for that. She had reasons for most things she did. Her mother had been a nurse. Her father had been absent in the specific, deliberate way that certain men choose absence as a lifestyle. She had one younger brother, Kwame, though she had not spoken to him in 4 years, not since the night everything in her previous life had quietly collapsed and she had rebuilt herself from different materials entirely. She was not, by nature, a violent person. She needed Jisoo to understand that. Across the room, he had not moved from the doorway. He was watching her with the particular stillness of a man running rapid calculations behind a composed face. She had seen that expression before. In meetings she was not supposed to witness, in phone calls she was not supposed to overhear, in the way his jaw set when someone brought him information he had not anticipated. Kwon Jisoo was 38. He had inherited the family's operations at 26, after his father's death, an event that the official record described as cardiac arrest and that everyone in the estate understood differently. He was precise, controlled, and largely without sentiment, except where his mother was concerned. That exception was exactly what Yun had been counting on, and exactly what someone else had been planning to use against him. For days earlier, Yun had found the vial. It was tucked inside a hollowed compartment beneath the false bottom of Madame Inawa's personal tea cabinet, the lacquered one, imported, that no one touched except the old woman herself and whoever restocked it. Yun restocked it every Tuesday. She had been doing so for 3 years without incident, which was precisely why no one had thought to consider what she might notice. The vial was pharmaceutical grade. No label. Approximately 30 milliliters of a solution so clear it could pass for water. She recognized the container style. She had seen identical ones during her time in Singapore, in a context she had worked very hard to forget. She had not replaced it. She had photographed it with the small secondary phone she kept taped behind the cleaning cart's lower shelf, and then carefully returned it to the exact position she had found it. That evening she had sent the photograph to the only contact in that phone's memory. The response came back in under an hour. Ricin derivative. Modified. Slow accumulation. Undetectable in standard tox screen. Designed to look like organ failure over 6 to 8 weeks. She had read that message 4 times. Then she had deleted it and sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the staff quarters and stared at the wall while the city outside moved through its ordinary Tuesday night. Someone was poisoning Madame Inawa. The cruelty of it was not the method. Slow poisoning was brutally calculated. But in the world the Kwon family occupied, calculation was a language everyone spoke. The cruelty was the authorship. Because Yun had been restocking that cabinet for 3 years, and the vial had not been there last Tuesday, which meant it had been placed there within the last 7 days by someone with access to this floor. She had spent the following 2 days watching. Not obviously. She had learned long ago how to observe without appearing to. She cataloged entries and exits, noted who lingered, tracked the small behavioral tells that people never realized they were broadcasting. By the 3rd day she had narrowed her list to 2 names. By the 4th day she had 1. Madame Inawa's personal secretary, a thin, careful man named Bak Yongsik, who had been employed by the family for 11 years and who had, she discovered through careful attention, recently begun receiving deposits into a secondary account that he accessed from a phone he kept separate from his work device. She had not yet told Jisoo. She had wanted to be certain. She had wanted documentation, leverage, something solid enough that a man like him would act on it rather than simply question her motives for bringing it. She was still building that case when she discovered, on the evening of the 4th day, that someone had accelerated the timeline. The dosage in the tea cabinet had doubled overnight. She went to Bak Yongsik's office first. It was late. Past 11, the house reduced to its nighttime skeleton crew of 2 guards per floor and the overnight kitchen attendant who slept through most of his shift anyway. Yun moved through the east corridor without her cart, which already made her invisible in a different way. A maid with a cart is furniture. A maid without one is just a woman walking, and in a house full of men trained to watch for threats, a woman walking quietly at midnight does not read as dangerous. She had been relying on that assumption for 3 years. Bak's office was locked, but the lock was a standard internal model, the kind the estate used for all non-sensitive rooms on floors 2 and 3. She had a copied key. She had copied keys to 11 doors in this building, not because she had planned for any specific emergency, but because she had learned, through hard experience in other houses in other cities, that preparation was the only thing that reliably stood between her and very bad outcomes. The office was neat in the aggressive way of people who have something to conceal. Everything squared, everything ordered, the desk surface almost aggressively blank. She checked the desk drawers first, nothing useful. The filing cabinet was more interesting. Tucked behind an accordion folder of household invoices, she found a burner phone, an envelope containing roughly 4 million won in cash, and a folded sheet of paper with a single address printed on it. The address was in Mapo district. She photographed everything, replaced it exactly, and left. Back in her room, she ran the address through 2 separate search methods and came back with a result that made the temperature in her chest drop several degrees. The address belonged to a shell company registered 18 months ago. The shell company, traced carefully through 3 layers of subsidiary registration, connected to a family name she recognized. Not Kwan. A different family. One that had been, according to the half-overheard conversations she had accumulated over 3 years of careful invisibility, in direct territorial conflict with Jisu's operations for the better part of 2 years. Someone had not just hired Bak Yongsik to poison Madame Inoue. Someone had hired him as a long-game investment, patient and deliberate, designed to remove Jisu's one genuine vulnerability, his mother, in a way that looked entirely natural. Grief, she understood, was a specific kind of weapon. A man distracted by the slow loss of his mother makes different decisions. Sloppier ones. He drops his guard in the specific places that matter. She had sat with all of this for approximately 40 minutes before deciding that documentation and patience were no longer options. The tea dosage had doubled. Inoue had consumed 2 cups that afternoon. At the modified concentration, 6 to 8 weeks became considerably shorter. She had gone to the kitchen, prepared the sedative, mild, precise, something that would read as natural sleep, and taken it upstairs in the old woman's customary late-night chamomile. The blade had been a contingency for a different scenario. It had become necessary when Inoue, half sedated and more alert than expected, reached for the house phone to call Bak Yongsik. "You drugged her," Jisu said. It was not a question. He had crossed the room while she was speaking and was now crouched beside his mother, 2 fingers at her wrist. His face angled away from Yun, so she could not read it. "Yes," she said, "and stabbed her. The blade is shallow. It didn't reach muscle. I needed her to stop moving before she reached the phone." He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally turned to look at her, his expression had shifted. Not softened exactly, but reorganized into something more complex than simple rage. "Why would she call Bak?" he said. "I believe she trusts him. She has for 11 years. Yun paused. "That trust is what made him useful to whoever hired him." Jisu stood. He was very still in the way that, she had learned, meant he was processing something rapidly and did not want his face to betray the speed of it. "Show me," he said. She showed him the photographs on the secondary phone, the address trace, the layered company registrations, the account deposits she had documented from Bak's secondary device. She walked him through it methodically, without editorializing, the way she had once been trained to present intelligence to people who needed facts arranged in order before they could act on them. He looked at the final photograph for a long time. "How long have you known how to do this?" he said. It was, she realized, exactly the right question. Not "who are you really" or "why should I believe you?" Those were the questions of someone reacting emotionally. His question was precise, professional, and told her he had already made a significant reassessment of who he was dealing with. "Long enough," she said. He looked at her. "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "But it's all I'm giving you right now." Another silence. He set the phone down on the writing desk near the window and turned to look at his mother's sleeping form, and something moved through his expression that was entirely private and entirely real. Grief, she thought, or the specific fear that precedes grief. The moment when you understand how close you came to a loss you weren't prepared for. "She would have been dead in 3 weeks, Yun said. Not unkindly. At the rate the dosage was increasing. He said nothing. "I didn't have time to bring you documentation you'd find convincing. I had to make a choice. You could have come to me directly." "With what? A vial and a theory?" "You would have questioned my motives. You would have been right to." She held his gaze. "I needed you to see the full picture. I was 2 days from having it. And the dosage changed." "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Bach has been with this family since before I took over. I know. My mother chose him herself. I know that too. He picked up the phone again and looked at the address in Mapo district. His jaw was tight. When he finally set it back down, his voice had changed, quieter, more controlled, the way water gets quieter right before it moves very fast. What would you have done in Yun's position? Waited for more proof, or acted on instinct to protect someone in danger? Tell me in the comments. Sit down, he said. I want to know everything. From the beginning. She told him everything. Not the version she had rehearsed during those 2 days of careful documentation. The clean, evidence-first presentation she had planned for a controlled reveal. She told him the real version. The one with the gaps and the fear and the moment 4 nights ago when she had sat on her narrow bed and understood that no amount of preparation was going to make this situation clean. He listened without interrupting. That was the thing about Jisoo she had not fully anticipated. He was a genuinely good listener. Not patient in the passive sense, but actively still, the kind of stillness that meant he was absorbing rather than simply waiting for his turn. When she finished, he was quiet for nearly a minute. Then he said, Bach will know something went wrong by morning. Yes. When my mother doesn't appear for her 6 o'clock tea. It's already past 5:30, Yun said. He looked at the window. The light had shifted. Pale gold now, soul assembling itself for another day with no awareness of what had taken place in this room. He moved to the door, opened it, and said something in a low voice to whoever was stationed outside. She heard a brief response, then footsteps moving away down the corridor. He closed the door again. I've had Bach's exit routes covered, he said. He won't leave the estate. He'll have a contact outside, a check-in protocol. If he misses it, I know. He looked at her steadily. How much does the other family know about you? The question landed with a precision she hadn't expected. She kept her expression even. Why would they know anything about me? Because you're not a maid, he said. It was stated plainly, without accusation. You haven't been for a long time if you ever were. So I'll ask again. How much do they know about you? She considered the cost of the answer for exactly as long as she could afford to. Enough, she said. That if Bach's contact realizes the operation has failed, they may move to eliminate loose ends. Meaning you. Meaning both of us. I've been in this house too long. Anyone watching from outside would have flagged me as a variable by now. Something shifted in the room, a recalibration. The two of them arriving simultaneously at the understanding that the immediate crisis was not Madame Inoa's condition or even Bach's exposure. The immediate crisis was the window of time between now and when the people who had engineered this situation realized their plan had unraveled. That window, Yun estimated, was approximately 2 hours. There's something else, she said. He waited. The Mapo address. I traced it through 3 shell layers to a family name. She paused. Seo Chanmin. Jisoo's expression didn't change. His hands, resting on the desk beside him, became very still. You're certain, he said. I traced it twice. Seo Chanmin was not simply a rival. He was the man who had, 2 years ago, ordered the attack that killed 2 of Jisoo's senior lieutenants and wounded a 3rd. The territorial conflict that had followed had been costly on both sides and had settled into a cold, watchful equilibrium that everyone understood was temporary. Someone had grown tired of waiting. He's been in Japan, Jisoo said, almost to himself. As of 3 weeks ago, Yun said. People move. He looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her, the way he hadn't allowed himself to since entering the room, as though whatever he was seeing required his full attention, and he had only just decided it was safe to give it. Who sent you here? He said quietly. No one sent me. Yun. I came because I needed work and this position was available. She held his gaze. What I was before this, that's a different conversation. One we don't have time for right now. He accepted that. She could see him file it away, not forgetting, never forgetting, but prioritizing. That was, she thought, what made him genuinely dangerous. Not his resources or his reputation. The absolute precision of his attention. A soft sound from the chaise. They both turned. Madame Inoa's hand had moved, her fingers curling slightly against the silk of her robe. The The sedative was wearing off ahead of schedule. And somewhere in the East Wing, Yun knew Bak Yongsik was waking up to a morning that wasn't going to unfold the way he'd planned. Inoue woke slowly, the way people do when the body has been chemically persuaded toward sleep, reluctant and disoriented, consciousness arriving in pieces rather than all at once. Her eyes found Jisoo first. They always would. Yun watched the recognition move through the old woman's face, followed immediately by confusion. And then, when Inoue turned her head and saw Yun standing 6 feet away, something more complex. Not fear exactly. Calculation. Even sedated, even wounded, Madame Inoue was calculating. "Jisoo," she said. Her voice was dry, careful. "Don't move," he said. He was already beside her, one hand covering hers. "The wound is shallow. You're going to be fine." Inoue's eyes moved back to Yun. "She stabbed me." "Yes," Jisoo said. "I know." "Then why is she still in this room?" "Because she also saved your life." He said it simply, without drama, and let the silence that followed do the work of explanation. Yun watched the old woman process this. Inoue was 71 years old and had survived 4 decades at the edge of one of Seoul's most powerful criminal organizations. First as a wife, then as a widow, then as the quiet, steel-spined matriarch who had held the family together during the 18 months between her husband's death and Jisoo's consolidation of power. She had not survived all of that by being slow. "The tea," Inoue said finally. "Yes," Yun said. "How long?" "The vial appeared 4 days ago, but the compound accumulates. Given your symptoms over the last 3 weeks, the fatigue, the mild nausea you attributed to your blood pressure medication, I believe you've been receiving trace doses for considerably longer." Inoue was quiet. Something moved behind her eyes, not grief, not anger, but the specific reckoning of a person who has just understood the full dimensions of a betrayal. "Yongsik," she said. "Just the name. Nothing else." "Yes," Jisoo said. Another silence. Yun could see the cost of it in the old woman's face. 11 years of trust dismantled in a single syllable. She looked away, giving Inoue the privacy of that particular pain, and found Jisoo watching her instead. He held her gaze for a moment, then looked back at his mother. "I need you to do something difficult," he said to Inoue. "I need you to call Bak. Tell him you want your morning tea. Tell him you slept unusually well and feel rested." Inoue absorbed this. "You want him to believe nothing has changed. For the next hour." "Yes. And then it's handled," Jisoo said. Inoue turned to look at Yun one more time. The assessment in her gaze was thorough and entirely without warmth. But at its end she gave a single slow nod that Yun understood was as close to acknowledgement as this woman offered anyone. "Give me the phone," Inoue said, while the old woman made the call, her voice impressively steady, her performance of normalcy so precise it was almost frightening. Jisoo moved to stand beside Yun near the window. They stood close enough that she could speak without being overheard. "The Mapo address," he said quietly. "Is there anything at that location that could be used as leverage? Documentation? Communications? Potentially. Bak would have been reporting through an intermediary. If that intermediary maintained records, I need someone who can access that location cleanly, before Seo Chanmin realizes the operation has failed and sanitizes it." He paused. "Someone who knows how to move through a building without being seen." She looked at him. "I've been moving through your building unseen for 3 years, she said. "Yes," he said. "I know." There was something in the way he said it, not accusatory, not transactional. Something quieter than either of those things. She had spent 3 years in this house constructing a careful, complete invisibility, and somewhere along the way he had seen through it and said nothing, and she found herself unexpectedly off balance by that particular revelation. "My mother's doctor will be here within the hour," he said. "After that, I need you." She nodded once. "Yun." He said her name the way he always had, clean, direct, no ornamentation. "Whatever you were before this. Whatever you came here to do or to find or to escape." He paused. "I think we should discuss it. After." "After," she agreed. On the chaise, Madame Inoue completed her call, set down the phone, and closed her eyes. In the growing morning light, her face was tired and composed and entirely resolved. Somewhere on the floor below them, Bak Yongsik was preparing a tray of poisoned tea for a woman who was already several steps ahead of him. The turning point, Yun understood, had already passed. What remained now was the reckoning. The Mapo address was a fourth-floor office in a building that presented itself as an import consultancy. Yun arrived at 7:40 in the morning, 40 minutes after Jisu's team had quietly surrounded the building's exits. She went in through the service entrance using a method she didn't explain to the two men Jisu had assigned to accompany her, who had the professional courtesy not to ask. The office itself took her 9 minutes to access and another 14 to work through. She was systematic and fast, photographing rather than removing, constructing a documentary record that would survive legal scrutiny if it ever needed to, and given what she was finding, she suspected it would. Seo Chanmin's intermediary had been meticulous. There were records of every communication with Bak Yongsik dating back 22 months, including the initial recruitment approach, 3 payment schedules, and a series of encrypted messages that had been decrypted and printed. Always a security mistake, always the kind of mistake that thorough, careful people make when they feel entirely safe. The final folder she found contained something she hadn't anticipated. 3 photographs. Surveillance quality taken at range. The first showed Jisu leaving his office building in Gangnam. The second showed Madame Inawa in the rear garden of the estate. The third showed Yun herself, pushing her cleaning cart through the ground floor corridor, caught through what must have been a pinhole lens installed somewhere she hadn't located. They had known about her. Not everything. If they'd known everything, the approach would have been different. But enough to flag her as a variable, exactly as she'd warned Jisu. She photographed the photographs and kept moving. By 8:15, she was back in the car. By 8:40, the complete documentation was in Jisu's hands. By 9 o'clock, Bak Yongsik was in a room in the estate's basement level, which Yun had never seen and did not need to, and 2 of Jisu's senior people were on a flight to Osaka with instructions she was not privy to and didn't ask about. The consequences for Seo Chanmin would not be legal ones. She understood that. She had made her peace with the specific moral geography of this situation 4 days ago, when she had first looked at a vial of ricin derivative and decided that her own hands were not clean enough to stand on principle. At 10:15, the estate's private physician confirmed that Madame Inawa would make a full recovery. The accumulated compound in her system was low enough that a proper treatment protocol could address it completely within 6 weeks. The stab wound, as Yun had calculated, required 3 stitches and no further intervention. Jisu received this information standing in the hallway outside his mother's room, and Yun, who was leaning against the opposite wall waiting, watched something move through his face that he didn't try to conceal. A loosening, a brief and genuine relief that came up from somewhere deep before he brought his expression back under control. He looked at her across the hallway. "Thank you," he said. It was not a transactional thank you. It was not the acknowledgement of services rendered. It was the kind that arrives when someone finally locates the words for something they've been holding for longer than the immediate situation warrants. She nodded. She didn't trust herself to answer with equal plainness, so she said nothing, which he seemed to understand. He crossed the hallway and stopped a few feet from her. Up close, in the flat daylight of late morning, he looked like what he was. A man who had not slept, who had spent the last 5 hours in a controlled crisis, who was running on the specific fuel of someone who has successfully protected what matters to them and is only now allowing the cost of it to register. "The photograph," he said, "of you. In the building. Yes. They were watching you. For a while, I think. Because of who you are. Not who you were pretending to be." She considered this. "Both, probably." He was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to know which organization," he said. "Not to use it against you. I want to understand the risk profile for the estate, for my mother." A pause. "For you." The addition of that last phrase was deliberate. She registered it precisely. "I'll tell you," she said. "Not today." "No," he agreed. "Not today." They stood in the hallway together for a moment. 2 people who had arrived at a strange and complicated honesty through a route that neither of them would have chosen. And the morning moved around them, indifferent and ordinary, as mornings do regardless of what has taken place inside them. 6 weeks later, Madame Inawa sat in the rear garden with her morning tea. Real tea this time, prepared by the new house secretary, a quiet, precise woman named Tae Bak-young, whom Jisoo had vetted through a process so thorough it had taken 11 days. The garden was in its early autumn form, the maples turning, the stone paths damp from the previous night's rain. Inoa held her cup with both hands and watched the light move through the leaves and did not speak for a long time. Yun sat across from her at the stone table, also not speaking. This was, improbably, a thing they had developed over the past 6 weeks, a shared capacity for silence that functioned, if not as warmth exactly, then as something in the same neighborhood. Inoa was not a warm woman. Yun had not come here looking for warmth. Between them they had arrived at something more durable. A mutual, clear-eyed respect that had the specific quality of things earned rather than given. "You're not leaving," Inoa said finally. It was not a question. "No," Yun said. "Jisoo asked you to stay." He asked. "I decided." Inoa made a small sound that might, in someone else, have been the beginning of a smile. "There is a difference," she said. "Yes." The old woman looked at her over the rim of her cup. Her color was fully restored now, her eyes sharp and unhurried. The weeks of treatment had erased the fatigue she had attributed to age and blood pressure, and which had in fact been a slow poison working quietly toward its intended end. "I was not kind to you," Inoa said. It was stated as a fact, without apology but also without deflection. "No," Yun agreed. "I was not kind to you, and you protected me anyway." "I protected him," Yun said. "You were the mechanism." Inoa considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "And now," she said. Yun looked at the garden. The maples, the damp stones, the gray soul sky beyond the estate walls. She thought about the conversation she and Jisoo had finally had, 10 days ago in his study, the door closed and the room quiet and both of them sitting across a desk with the accumulated weight of what they actually were to each other arranged between them like a document requiring signatures. She had told him the real version. The organization she had worked for, past tense, genuinely past tense. The work she had done, the reason she had needed to disappear into a series of domestic positions in cities where no one looked for the kind of person she had been. The reason she had recognized the ricin compound immediately. The reason she had known exactly how to copy 11 keys and photograph classified documents and trace shell companies through 3 registration layers. He had listened the same way he always listened. Completely, without interrupting, without letting his face tell her too much until he was ready. At the end he had said, "Are you still active?" "No." "Are you certain?" "I have been for 2 years." The soul posting was genuinely what it appeared to be. "I needed to be somewhere stable. Somewhere quiet. And instead you found this." "And instead I found this," she agreed. He had looked at her for a long time. Then, "I have a significant problem with operational security. I have resources and I have loyal people, but I don't have anyone with your particular skill set." Another pause. "I'm not recruiting you. I want to be clear about that. I'm telling you the context so that if you're looking for a reason to stay, that isn't." He stopped. "Isn't what?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "I don't want you to stay because of obligation," he said, "or because leaving feels complicated. I want you to stay because you want to be here." She had sat with that for a moment. The radical simplicity of it. "That," she'd said finally, "is the most honest thing anyone in this world has ever said to me." The beginning of something had moved across his face. Not a smile exactly, she was learning, a man who smiled easily or often. But the genuine version of whatever the thing before a smile is, the thing that means the same. Now, in the garden, Madame Inoa set down her cup and looked at her with those sharp, clear eyes. "He is not easy," the old woman said. "I know. Neither are you. I know that too." Inoa nodded slowly, as though something had been confirmed that she had been waiting to have confirmed. She picked up her cup again. The garden was quiet and the maples were burning orange and red against the gray sky, and somewhere inside the estate, Yun knew Jisoo was in his study working through the documentation she had prepared on a security concern. The kind of work that was now, quietly and without formal announcement, simply what they did together. She was not, by nature, a person who trusted easily or stayed in one place long. She was staying. Not because the complications of leaving had become too numerous, though they had. Not because she owed anything to this house or this family, though the ledger between her and Jisoo had become too complex and too mutual for the word debt to mean very much anymore. She was staying because for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, being somewhere felt like a choice she had made rather than a position she had taken, that she thought was worth protecting. Much like him, this story explored loyalty, sacrifice, and the complicated courage it takes to protect someone at great personal risk. What was the moment that stayed with you most? Share your thoughts below. And if this story moved you, consider subscribing for more. Every week brings a new story worth your time.